Hi there. Welcome to the Sober Circle channel. Enjoy this speaker tape.
Yeah, you did a good job. You did fine. Thank you, Cole. Good evening, friends. My name is Ray, and I'm an alcoholic. And it's really good to be here. First of all, I want to congratulate the committee on their fine choice and selection of speakers for this convention. I think they really done good. I especially want to thank them or congratulate them for their choice for this evening's speaker. I'm a member of the Waldorf group, and we're located in Waldorf, Maryland, and I'm sure you've heard of us. But we meet on Wednesdays and Saturday evenings at 8:30. If you're ever in the area, we'd certainly like to have you come by and share with us. We think we probably have the best group in all of Alcoholics Anonymous. And we hope you feel that way about your home group. If you don't, and things aren't going the way you'd like them to go in your home group, and things seem messed up, don't leave it and go to somebody else's and mess it up. Stick with your own and see if you can get things ironed out. I want to say at this time, I married my wife Linda 9 years ago this January, and I'm honored to be with her. And we traveled a lot together, and she was able to come with me on this trip, and I certainly like that. I enjoy being with her. That's why I'm married. And she celebrated her 13th anniversary in July at the Waldorf group, and we have a home, whatever that means. I can tell you this, we don't sit around all the time and read the 12 steps to one another. There are certainly other things that go on. I guess you've already noticed when I'm privileged to do something like this, I get a little confused. I just really don't know which way to go, what to do, how to act, hardly. And just to boil confusion, I remember of another guy that had that problem. It seems these two guys, the story is these two guys were out hunting. One guy was an alcoholic and the other guy was normal, whatever the hell that is. And they came on this pond, and this young woman had been in swimming, and as they approached the pond, she got out and she was nude. And she just stood there. And the two guys walked over to her, and she just didn't move. She just stood perfectly still. And the normal guy kind of sashayed over to her, and he whispered in her ear. He says, "Are you game?" And she said, "Yeah." And the alcoholic shot her. This next guy had to be an alcoholic. Had to be. The story is he was 95 and she was 90. And she hadn't been feeling well. She went to the doctor examined her and came back, sat in the room, and he looked at her and says, "Well, you're pregnant." And she couldn't move. She was just froze. And in about 5 minutes, she was able to dial her husband, so she did, and he answered the phone, and right away, she lights into him. She said, "You old geezer, you have got me pregnant." And there was a pause, and the old man cleared his throat, and he says, "And to whom am I speaking?" I'm supposed to tell you a little about me tonight. That's why I'm here. When I get into that, the big book plainly says, he wrote it in 1938, what my duty is here tonight is I'm to tell you a little about my life before I drank, what happened, and what my life has become since I've been a sober member of Alcoholics Anonymous. And within the 2 short hours that's been allotted me, I'm going to attempt to do that. And that is not the case at all. I was born in the state of Virginia. I bet you thought I was from New York or somewhere, didn't you? And my hometown is Fredericksburg. But actually I was born and raised 6 miles south of Fredericksburg in a little fork in the road called Port Royal Forks. They since found it necessary to change the name of that little dot on the map. It's now known as New Post. And that ought to excite the hell out of everybody. And I'm the third of 5 children. There were 4 boys and a girl, and my mom and dad, the 7 of us, lived in a very small 4-room house, and we were very poor. I will describe to you how poor we were by telling you that around our house the rainbow showed up in black and white. And we really weren't doing all that great. We really weren't. And my father eventually deserted. I like to think that all parents do the best they can do. At any given time, I choose to believe that. And I think they did the best he could do, and I think that what happened to him, he got so tired of watching us starve to death. He couldn't get any work. It was during the Depression, and he just simply left. And we were there, the 6 of us, including my mom, and not soon after that, we became a ward of the state of Virginia, which meant we went on the thing they call relief in those days. And I never liked that. I remember that from my very, very earliest memories of those people giving me things. And I didn't like that. Every time they gave me something, it seemed they took something from me. And I think that's the case. I didn't like that. And as we went along, the people, the powers that were decided my mother probably wasn't able to take care of all 5 of us, so they took the 2 older boys and they put them in foster homes down near Richmond, in a little community called Farmville. And at that time, I automatically became the man of the house, and I was 8 years old. And I had my first drink of alcohol at age 17, so the 9 years sandwiched there, the only adjective that I know to describe those years of my life was just absolutely devastating. I became very selfish. I became self-centered. Everything pertaining to anything was about me. I was very insecure. I was fearful. I didn't like anything about anything. I especially never liked being short. That was always a problem with me, being short. And I know that other people noticed that. I'm 5 feet 8 and a 16th. And I'm convinced now that other people noticed that. Linda, my wife, and I were in a department store the other day, and she was at the perfume counter, and she was checking these things out on her arm and everything, and she was distracted for a minute. The salesperson came to me, it happened to be a young lady, and she told me that they had a new cologne. And she said that she thought maybe I'd like to try it. And I said, well, what does it do? And she said, well, it makes you smell taller. And I didn't buy it then. When I go back, I think I'll get me a gallon of it or so. I'm 4 grades of school, formally educated, a little country school. There were 7 elementary grades then, and the school was a big, long school and had a petition, 4 grades in one end of the building and 5th, 6th, and 7th in the other end. And I passed the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd grade without any problem at all, and I got into 4th grade and I could not pass. I just simply could not pass the 4th grade. And I stayed in that thing long, and I'm going to tell you, it's a little embarrassing. I'll give you a hint. I was in the 4th grade so long I started to date the teacher. Finally got out of that thing. Today I know why I didn't pass the 4th grade. I refused to pass the 4th grade, but I was fearful, I know that now, that I couldn't do the 5th grade work. So that's where I came from all of my life. I was always coming from that spot where I didn't measure up. I just simply did not measure up. At age 17, I was in my hometown, Fredericksburg, and a buddy of mine had sent an older man over to the ABC store to get a bottle of wine. I had no knowledge of that, but when the guy brought the bottle of wine back, my buddy took the top off and took a drink, and he handed it to me, and I took a drink. And everything changed. Everything about me changed. I was no longer short. I could do anything I wanted to do. I could converse with anybody I wanted to. I could be anybody that I wanted to be, go anywhere I wanted to go. And I don't know whether or not I was an alcoholic from my very first drink, but I do know this, that I was at least psychologically addicted to the drug alcohol from my very first encounter. I just wanted more. I loved what it made me feel like, or what it didn't make me feel like. And I just loved that. So for the next 20 years, on a daily basis, I drank something each and every day of that time that it was humanly possible to get it. Every day. And I never, ever entertained the thought of not drinking. Ever. I was married the first time when I was 21. I met a girl in my hometown. Her mother owned a restaurant. We went together about a year, and we were married. Shortly after we were married, very shortly after we were married, they sold a restaurant in Fredericksburg, and they were Washingtonians. So we moved to Washington, D.C. in July of 1950. So I did most of my alcoholic drinking in and around the metropolitan Washington, D.C. area. We moved to 8th and K Street Southeast, down by the Marine Barracks, if it means anything to anybody. At age 23, I went in the military. I'm a Korean veteran. They sent me to Europe, and I was glad of that. I was in basic training down in Camp Pickett, Virginia. I was in the medical corps. I don't have any war stories. And we had 16 weeks of that. And after the 16th week, they put us all in this huge room, about the size of this, I think. There was a battalion of people, 1,000 men, after graduation on 16 weeks, and they had 987 of those guys got orders to go to the West Coast to go to Korea, because that was the only reason any of us were in there. And they put 13 of us in the corner over here, and they said, "You men are going to Austria." And I'd never heard of it. I had never heard of it. And I noticed this guy next to me. I said, "Hey, man, where's Austria?" He said, "It's nowhere near Korea." I said, "I'm ready. I'm ready right now." And so they were talking about a 10-day delay en route. I didn't want anything to do with that. I knew how they operated. They changed their mind. But I had to take that, and I went home to Washington, and I stayed 10 days, and I got aboard ship, and we went to Europe, and I stayed in Austria 19 months. And I had a holiday. I really had a holiday. I was privileged to more things there than I can imagine, than I'm going to try to convince you of, because I don't believe part of them. And I became a non-commissioned officer almost right away, it seemed like. And how that happened, they send a certain amount of stripes in the command, and they don't want to send them out. And they gave them to everybody else they could find. Everybody, and then I was standing there, and they just handed me some. So I sewed them on, and I used them until the very last minute. And my job there was, I was to relieve the NCOs in charge of the dispensaries that had rotated back to the States that they hadn't gotten a permanent replacement for. And I would be in a unit maybe 2 days, or 2 weeks, or 3 weeks, or 8 days, and nobody ever knew where I was, especially me. And I didn't have to answer to anybody in particular. And I just had a ball. I just had a ball. But I wasn't making enough money. I just wasn't making enough money. I couldn't get my then wife, to send me anymore. And things were getting bad. I was borrowing more money from my buddies than I could repay, and that's a no-no. That is really a no-no. And this opportunity came along, and it happened this way. When I was over there, I don't say anything up here to be offensive to anybody, because that's not the way, that's not my job here, but I'm just telling you what happened to me. And when toward the end of things there, this social disease that we refer to in this country, the number one social disease, was very prevalent. As a matter of fact, it was epidemic over there. And those guys are just doing a lot of socializing. And they would come to me to help them out, and if they went to the chain of command, they could lose the stripe, and nobody wanted to do that. So they would come to me and try to get me to help them out. I said, "Man, I couldn't help you." They would shoot me for that, because they were meticulous about the narcotics in the prescriptions, in the penicillin. And it just happened at that time the United States Army hired a civilian doctor, an Austrian doctor. And he didn't speak English very well, and I didn't speak German at all. And I would just put these blank prescription pads on his desk, and he would sign them. And each one of them meant 2 cc's of penicillin. And that meant a job. I mean, that meant a cure, 2 cc's. And I just got them all together, and pretty soon I went into business for myself. With Uncle Sam's penicillin, and it's a matter of supply and demand. No matter what you're selling, it's supply and demand. And we had to put a price on. As a matter of fact, business got so good or so bad, how you want to look at it, I took on 2 partners. And we really did well. We didn't do any of this to make any money. I chose those guys, not knowing then, but I know now, because they drank the way I did, and we got all this money together, and if we couldn't rig it up, we had parties. We never sent a dime home, not a dime. That was the reason for it. And the most insane thing I did, and I mention this to you now, I'm 24 years old. The most insane thing I did, the insanity of alcoholism had already begun in my life, because this NCO approached me, and he had met this girl in Germany. She looked great, but she wasn't well. And I smuggled penicillin out of Germany, out of Austria into Germany to administer to her so he could be friendly with her. Now that's crazy. And never thinking the most insane part of all that was that I'm thinking that I'm not doing anything wrong. I'm helping all these people. I'm saving all these stripes, and I'm helping all these people with relationships. There were dependent families over there. I'll probably save some families. And this is the rationale that I was conjuring up in my insane mind. And I know had I gotten caught, especially for the last thing I told you about, I would have now be processed another Lewisburg or one of them other places they put crazy people in and mess with government property. But I never ever thought that I was doing anything wrong. But I needed to have the money to drink the way I needed to drink at the time, and I was 24. I came home and I was honorably discharged. I was 25 by now. My wife was working. She was a bookbinder. And we had some mustard note money left, and she was making good money, and I would just take her to work, and I'd go back and I'd drink all day, and I'd tell her at night I was been looking for a job, and I hadn't. And she kept asking me about going to work, and I just couldn't imagine what the hell her hurry was. I was only 25, and I'd never been trained to do anything. I'd been a short order cook for a time in my hometown, and I'd been a bakery truck driver, and I didn't do either one of those very well. And she just kept asking me. So I was in southeast Washington one day, and I'll mention these locations. They don't mean anything to anybody but me. Well, Independence Avenue, near the Capitol building, and they were putting up this garden-type apartment. So I went in. I said, well, I'll go in and ask this guy for a job, and I know very well he won't hire me. Now, at least tonight I'll be able to tell the truth that I did look for work. And I went in, and I found the superintendent, and evidently he didn't put me on. And I thought he was crazy. And he and another guy went over and got a mortar box and a mixing hoe. And he brought it over and set it beside this huge, must have been 50 tons of sand. And he said, now look, he said, you put so much sand, so much cement, so much lime, and so much mortar in this box, and you mix it to a certain consistency with this hoe. And after you get all that done, he said, you see the man over in the corner? He said, you take the mortar over to him, and he'll do all the work. So that's exactly what he told me. Exactly. And I started mixing mortar. And I mixed a lot of mortar. I mixed mortar for a little over 3 years. I was a real mortar mixer, I can tell you. Really. The first character building thing I had ever done in my life. I mixed mortar there. I mixed mortar at downtown Washington, D.C. on the sidewalk. I'm 25 now. And all these pretty things walking by. And I'm in the middle of that mortar box. At the University of Maryland, we built a swimming pool out there, and I'm mixing mortar out there, and they were younger yet. It really did something to me. It really did. And we get these big jobs. After you mix mortar for a year or two, you get tired of it. We get these big jobs, and I would ask the boss, I said, man, this job is big enough that you should be able to get a mixing machine. And he would look straight at me. He said, Ray, I already got one. And I said, well, And I just kept mixing more. But after a little over 3 years of that, I became a mechanic in my trade, and I'm a ceramic tile setter. We deal with ceramic tile, marble, slate, quarry, and stuff like that. And I immediately went in the union. Immediately. And my salary at least doubled. I didn't pay any attention to that. We were doing fine. We were doing fine. I did not and was not trying to excel or aspire to anything. We were doing fine. We had a nice apartment. We had a nice home. We had a nice car. We dressed well. We went anywhere we wanted to go. At that time in Washington, D.C., if you went to the Lotus, you were in good shape. And we went there a couple times a week. And we were just doing things the way we wanted to do. My salary at least doubled in this union. And that went on for about a month, and I think the government had a job they wanted us to do yesterday in a building down there. So we went down, a bunch of us did, for the company that I was working for. We took a cot. I did anyway. And we would sleep a couple of hours. We'd get up and work 18, 20 hours. They wanted it done this. And I made an awful lot of money in that building. A lot of money. And they gave me this money in 2 separate envelopes, and I took it home this night, and I will never forget this, I'm sure. And my wife and I counted this money out on the kitchen table, and there was more money than I thought that I would be able to earn in my lifetime. And I became very greedy. I just had this, I guess you might call it obsession, to get a hold of as much money and material things as I could. And I don't believe consciously that I had ever entertained that thought before. I don't think so. The obsession to do that was very akin to the feeling that I had to get more alcohol from my very first drink in that park in my hometown years earlier. And I became very greedy. About a month and a half after that, I decided I was going to figure out a way to keep everybody else's hands out of my money. And what I did, I decided to go into business for myself. And the year 1960 and 61, I formed the company. I had 3 trucks on the road. I had a minimum of 7 people working for me. And at that time, and I was aware of this, I had arrived as far as the economics of my life were concerned. I worked 7 days a week, however many hours it took. That's what I did. But if I could just hold the status quo in my company and not add another account, that I would always be economically secure. And I would drive down the road in a nice car, a nice truck, or whatever, and I would think about that. Because I did not want to be poor again. And I think really what I was trying to do, was trying to make up for what I thought I'd been cheated out of in my childhood. And I couldn't do that. I just simply could not do that. Maybe it can be done. But it didn't work with me because I became spiritually sick. That was where I was sick anyway, was spiritually. And I misused, abused everybody that I met that I could use. Everybody. And I'm certainly not proud of that. But if I had you and you were working for me or around me or with me and I could use you, I would, and I would just suck you dry and I would discard you when you're no longer any good to me. That I could no longer get anything out of you. And I just continued to do that. I went down in a little place called Clinton, Maryland. I bought a nice home. Beautiful home. And during the process of the building of the house, I had the bricklayer put me a nice barbecue pit in the backyard. And everything went fine. We moved in the house, the barbecue pit worked, till the guy next door started the building on his lot. He put a barbecue pit in his backyard. It was bigger than mine. And there's no self-respecting drunks don't put up with that. And I said, well, I'll fix this guy, so I just go down and chip down the end of my barbecue pit and build onto it. And that's what I did. I was up with that, keeping up with the Joneses, the Smiths, Browns, it didn't make them who you were. And I had the bricklayer extend my barbecue pit. I looked over a couple of days later, he was doing the same thing. So we got into what I now refer to as this barbecue pit war. And by the time this barbecue pit war was over, my barbecue pit was done as big as my house. And it never dawned on me one time, I didn't even need a barbecue pit. It wasn't, but I was just caught up into that. I was just into that, and I was really sick. Really, it just didn't make any sense. And I continued this on for some time. You know, on the outside looking in, I suspected people thought it was almost ideal. We had a son by now. And there was another story. I'd come home sometime, I'd drive a truck, and he wanted to ride around the block with his dad in this truck. And maybe I'd take him around the block one trip once a week. I had to get in the house, to get on the phone, to contact the people, to make more money. And that was my thing. That was just my continuous thing. And I think I got to the place where that there was an end to everything. Everything was just piling up. And what happened was I had to file a bankruptcy petition for my company. And I didn't want to do that. I did everything known to man or anybody else to prevent that. Because I didn't want to give that up, because it was an extension of me, something I had built. It was born out of me, from me, and I'd worked hard for it. But I had no choice. I had no choice. And we went in, we filed a bankruptcy thing. I had a good lawyer, was able to keep the house. A couple of days later, I went back to work in the union as a tile setter. And I could have stayed in that house to this day on a tile setter's wage. But the point was that I continued to drink. And alcoholism is an illness, and it's progressive. And it's just, in case nobody ever told you which way it progresses, it's always down. Always down. I look at my life, and if I had had a rubber ball in my hand, the first drink I took in that park bench in Fredericksburg, Virginia, and dropped it on the concrete deck there, a rubber ball, the bounce would have just gotten lower and lower from the bounce of the ball. And that's what happened in my life in the 20 years that I drank. The bounce, and it got to the place where no longer was any bounce. There was just simply no longer any bounce. I went back in the union, I'm working, I'm doing fine. But I'm continuing to drink. And I'm getting worse all the time. The day came that I was no longer physically or mentally able to do work as a tile setter. I just couldn't give a man a day's work. So now my whole life had taken a complete circle. Complete. And I'm back in the mortar box from where I started. And I'm again working for $11 and $13 a day. That was the wage then for scab labor. And sometimes I'd work for $11 a day because I'd go up and tell the boss, I said, I'll work for 11. I knew the scale was 13, most young union people. But I had done the same thing. And they would hire me to save the $2 a day. And again, at that time, we'd lost everything. Everything was gone. Everything. The trucks, the cars, the house, the furniture, the clothes, the jewelry, the silverware, the silver, everything. Everything was gone. And my wife and I and one child, our son, he was 9 years old at the time, we were living in a $10 a week sleeping room at 12th and Pennsylvania Avenue Southeast in Washington, D.C., 12 blocks from the Capitol building, a $10 a week sleeping room. The bathroom was in the hallway. She was cooking on a hot plate. And what she would cook would be what I would steal, because I certainly wasn't going to spend my wine money for anything as ridiculous as food. Not then. And we were eventually evicted from that. So we came together, the three of us were together one day, and I was unusual. We started back in the house, and the landlady had locked the door, and she'd put all our belongings on the porch. And she wouldn't even allow my wife to go upstairs, whether or not she'd overlooked anything. And we just turned around and walked back down on the corner of 12th and Pennsylvania Avenue Southeast. Doesn't mean anything to anybody but me, but this is where it happened. And we just stood there and looked at each other, the three of us. And she had the boy by the hand, and presently she started to walk away, and she started to roll her brothers. I knew where she was going. And I just waited until I got out of sight, and we didn't say a word. Not a word. And we'd been married at that time about 14 years. About 14 years. And I waited until she got out of sight, and I spun around, and I started walking toward the Capitol building. I knew exactly where I was going. And I went straight past there on down to the bus stations, the Greyhound and Trailway bus stations, which were at that time at New York Avenue and 12th Street, Northwest. And there was a park there, and I knew there was a park there. And I knew people sat in that park with two overcoats on, because I had ridden up to the intersection there in my new car, a new truck, big bank account, and looked at those people over in that park. And I would sit there and look at him, and I knew very well that someday I would be there. I knew that. See, what I was drinking, I was insane, but I wasn't crazy. And I knew what alcohol did to people, but I was absolutely powerless to stop. I could not stop. So I walked straight to that park, sat down on one of those benches, and I was more comfortable then than I had been in years, because now I was where I belong. And it was another 2 years, almost 2 years, before I saw either my wife or my son. And what I did, I just walked the streets of the District of Columbia, and I bummed quarters. I just bummed quarters. And the only thing that I owned two of in the last 2 years that I drank was overcoats. Every time I saw an overcoat that wasn't wrapped around somebody, I'd put it on. I just put it on. I knew I'd be able to use it. I'd be able to hock it. If it was going to rain. I'm not trying to promote anything, but an overcoat's the easiest thing I ever stole in my life. You can forget I said that if you want to, but I tell you now, if it was wintertime, the coats and wraps would be laying all around you. You could just come in and give you a carte blanche. You know, you just help yourself. And that's what I used to do. I used to sneak in back of buildings and stuff like that and just help myself. And I had nice overcoats for a while, till I hocked them or something. You know, when I first started telling this story around my area, when I first got sober in AA, about the coat deal, there'd be a pause just before the hour fall, and everybody go get the coat. And I just kept walking the streets. And my thing was Wild Irish Rose. That was my thing. VO for years I had drunk. That's all I was bought. But in the end, and I like to think of it as the end, and it can be, I know that now, if you had Wild Ice or VO, I would prefer the Wild Ice. It was easier on me. Easier. And I drank a lot. I drank it 24 hours a day the last 2 years that I drank. That's all I drank. Never made me drunk. Just stupid. Stupid. See, I found out somebody else about Wild Ice since I've been sober. You see, only wine known to man has never seen a grape. No grape. No grape. You know? It's just all chemicals. It just makes you walk around, just like. I just loved it. I just loved it. I remember one time, me and my two overcoats walked up to this lady. She was standing and watched on a bus stop, looking at the street, you know, facing the street. And I walked alongside and asked her for a quarter. And she didn't acknowledge whether or not she heard me, so I just tugged her on her sleeve and asked her, and she didn't give it to me. And I just walked to somebody else. I tell you that every time I talk because I could still feel that, the humiliation and the degradation that brought about in my life. But I couldn't help it. I just moved on to somebody else. I mean, we got too stark. And if I continued on, I just got enough quarters. I never had $4.20. I always had 4 pints of Wild Ice and 2/3. I never measured anything by dollars. It was always how much wine I had. I never bought cigarettes. I always bummed them or pissed butts. And Wild Ice was was the only thing to. The last 2 years that I drank, 3 other winos and I went over on the old Kenilworth Avenue dump. Now, this was a city dump, the Washington, D.C. city dump. It took up acres. And we went over on that dump and we built a shack. And I lived my last 2 years of drinking in that, my last 10 months. My last 10 months of drinking in that shack on that dump. And how I got there, I was on Bladensburg Road one morning. Doesn't mean anything to anybody. But there was a Pincus liquor store there. And I got into the place where everything was silhouetted. You know, I couldn't see very well, and there was somebody standing there, so I walked up to it and asked it for a quarter. I didn't give a damn who it was or what it was. And he started yelling, I said, man, what the hell's wrong with you? He started backing away. Well, he got far enough away I could see him now. He had on 2 overcoats, too. And he just took me by the arm and took me back in back of the D&D Tire Company and took his wine bottle. Didn't say another word and gave me a drink out of his wine. And we became fast friends. And there were 3 of them there when I arrived there. I made 4 course, and he informed me that 2 other guys had gone out to steal something, bread or bologna or something. Each of us used to go in different directions to get different things. And we came back. We all got together that afternoon. We walked around. Just walked around. That's all that I ever had to do on the street was walk around. And they were filling this dump in at the time. The city dump, you know, of course, it's gone now. We were filling it in, and we were standing in the back of this little town called Comar Manor. And we were watching them bring the trucks in and dump the bed of the truck, you know, and then one morning, buddy said, one big piece of plywood fell out, and one of my buddies said, you know, we ought to go over and take that plywood and build a shack. And as soon as I could never thought of that. Really, I was at the place where I would never thought of that. So as soon as they got done working that afternoon, we rushed right over and we put up this makeshift shack. And it was constructed well enough we slept in it that night. And that's where I lived in that thing the last 10 months that I drank. And me being in construction, you know, it was also automatic that I became in charge of the building of the shack. You know, it just was without question. But you know, this thing had to be a little special. It had to be portable. You know, because it fell in a while, we had to move. We moved a lot. We moved just kept moving. You know, it's a real beautiful recreational area now, and I kind of resent that they didn't name that after me. That park, you know, Bennett Park. That doesn't sound bad, does it? Bennett Park? But it didn't. And I would get out of that shack in the morning, I'd waken or come to. I never did awaken. I'd either pass out or come to, and I would get out of that shack, and I couldn't find any wine. My buddies had either drunk it or I drank it the night before, and they were all gone. And I'd have to go through this little town of Cornwall Mountain to get to the liquor store. And I'd go down there, I'd bum enough to get 3 more pints before I came back to the shack to drink them. And I'd get out of that shack, and I'd be walking through this little town of Cornwall Mountain without a drink first thing in the morning, and I would be shaking so bad people thought I was waving at them. And I'd hurry up down to the Pringles liquor store, and I'd stay there until I got 3 more pints of wild Irish. I'd just keep bumming until I got them. And there wasn't any big thing about it. That's just what I did. And on the way back, I would drink 1. And then I'd get in the shack, and I'd lie down, and I'd drink another half one. And by this time, I was somewhere near, I would be lying down, and I would be somewhere near the 3rd ring of Sadron, I guess. And I would be thinking to myself, Ray, you know, you're really not doing too bad. And you know, the months prior to that, when I didn't have any place at all to go, I really wasn't doing all that bad. I didn't think. I got out of this shack one morning, December the 14th, 1966. That's my sober date. And I got out of this shack, and I started through Cornwall Mountain, and this guy pulled alongside me in a beautiful car. Nice car, and he beckoned me to get in. And right away, I knew there was something wrong. I knew there was something wrong. You know, all the guys that I must, no offense, the people that I was with at the time, the guys, the front of the pants was wet all the time, including mine. And it was just a natural thing. Nobody said anything to anybody because, you know, it's just the way we lived. And this guy beckoned me to get in his car, and I got all the way over to the passenger side, and I looked over to see the front of his pants was wet, and I said, no. And I said, well, I know there's something wrong with this guy. So finally he insisted that I get in, and I did, and he informed me right away that he was a professional thief. He had seen me in the area, and he wanted to know if I wanted to help him rob a place downtown. And I told him, certainly. And we rode around for a while, and he had gone down and cased this joint. He really had. It was a building, and he had the quarters all drawn. He was professional. Didn't drink. Right away, I didn't trust him. And he had drawn this thing, and he said, now, when you get to this quarter, there's going to be a guard there. You're going to have to run. I said, wait a minute. I said, I can hardly walk. And it was the truth. And he got a little irritated. We just rode around a lot that day. And we just rode around just aimlessly, and we wound up in southern Maryland, down below La Plata, and we robbed a place there, and we were caught. We went up to this place, the lights were out. It sells tractors and harrows and farm equipment. The lights were out and everything, and it was dark. And we went inside, and we were in there, and I'm leaning against the counter, and he's working on the safe over here. And all of a sudden he says, my God, the cops outside. So he runs toward the front of the building. This is a matter of record over there. He runs toward the front of the building, and I wasn't in any particular hurry. I just started walking toward the back of the building. What the hell? All I was doing was waiting for him to open the safe. I really and truly didn't think that I was doing anything wrong. Really. And so I went all the way in the back, and there was a half bath back there. I could hear all this, and I was a half bath, so I could see the commode through the light there in the back of the building. And I went in and turned the light on. It's a country place. And from the ceiling, closed the door, put the little latch on it, and sat down on the commode, proceeded just like I would in your home or mine to use the bathroom. And I'm sitting there now in that position, and I hear all this noise up front. I said, this guy's in a lot of trouble. Yeah. And I'm sitting there on the throne, and I'm thinking I'm worried about transportation back to the dump. They had 4 or 5, and they had 4 or 5 cars that had to take me anywhere they wanted me to go, and I'm worried about. And then there was a knock on the door, and I said, these people got a hell of a nerve, man can't use the bathroom. And I wouldn't open the door, and this guy kicked it in. Donald T. Poole was his name. He was probably a sergeant. Now he's getting ready to retire. And he had his gun in his hand. I said, hey, man, what's this? He informed me right away it was a 38 and he wanted to know if I wanted any parts of it. I said, no, hell no. And so he grabbed for me and I grabbed for my pants. And we had it all the time. Really. And they put me in the car and put me in jail in La Plata. And I stayed there 45 days. I was there Christmas and New Year's of 66 and 67. I'd been in jail about 5 days, and I wanted to know what they described to me explained to me as being delayed DTs, and I damn near died. I became so violent that there were 2 men cages there, or cells they call them, and I became so violent that they took the guy out of the cell that was in there with me for his protection, and they just left me in there to do whatever I was going to do. And I damn near died. And I'm certainly not trying to be dramatic about that. I like to mention that because, you know, if I would decide to drink again, that's where I start. Like the animal that I had become in that cage. I start there, or worse. And I believe that. So if I have ever thought about a drink in my 21.5 years of sobriety, I always think about crawling around in that cage like an animal. And it's not so inviting. I stayed there 45 days, as I said, and on January 30th, 1967, I was tried and convicted of grand larceny. I was facing a maximum of 15 years. The judge there gave me 2 years in the Maryland House of Correction. It meant the Maryland Penitentiary. Gave me a 2-year sentence. And immediately after he sentenced me to 2 years and I became a felon, he looked down over his glasses at me and he says to me, he said, Mr. Bennett, he said, I believe you're worth saving. And of course I agreed with him. And he suspended the 2-year prison sentence and he court-ordered me for 6 months to a place we have up there called Crownsville. It's predominantly a mental institution and it's next door to Annapolis. And it's been there forever. I think in the early 1900s they started putting insane people in barbed wires. And they had pictures of progressions on the wall there. But they had set it, and it was acres large, and they had set aside 2 cottages within that institution for the care and rehabilitation of alcoholics. And they transported me there the afternoon of January 30th after the morning of that day that I had been tried and convicted. And I attended my first Alcoholics Anonymous meeting in Cottage 15 that night. And that was the best thing that ever happened to me in my life. I didn't know what was going on. You know, on the way up the road there, I'm 37 years old now, and on the way up the road there, I'm 45 days without a drink of alcohol, and I'm physically dry, sober. As physically sober as I would ever be. And it was about a 45 or 50-minute ride up there. Now, I'm thinking pretty well now, and I tried to imagine what had happened to me. What had happened? Where I'd gotten from where I was until where I was then. And you know, in that 50-minute ride, I could not figure it out. I couldn't figure it out. But I got there, and I went to that meeting that night, and as soon as they started that meeting, they started to tell me. And they've been telling me ever since. And I've been coming ever since. There were strange people coming into that. They were sponsors, outside sponsors, coming into the institution. And I thought they were AA people, just like you and me. And but I thought they were freaky. I really did. I did, really. And the first night I was in there, this guy took a liking to me, and I could tell he did. You know, he just took a liking to me. And after the meeting was over, he just rushed right up to me and wanted to talk to me. No, first of all, you wanted to hold my hand. I said, you ain't holding my hand. You go hold somebody else's hand. You ain't holding my hand. And then he wanted to talk to me. I didn't, and it just went on. It just went on. He was the sponsor of the group. After every meeting, he'd come up to me and try to, I don't know what he wanted. I thought I knew what he wanted, but I wasn't always sure, you know, and I didn't really know. And he would come up to me and talk about Jesus, and I said, my Lord, what in the world's wrong with this man? He'd leave, and I'd run upstairs and get in bed and cover up clothes and all, my head and all, because I didn't know what was going on. I was trapped in there. And I've been in there about 3 weeks, and he runs up to me, and I know what happened now. Dear, dear friend of mine, I love him dearly. After about 3 weeks, I'd been in there, and this meeting, he had gotten on a real spiritual high during the meeting. He rushed right up to me, but this close. He said, Ray, I love you. I said, don't you touch me. So, if people tell you that they love you in Alcoholics Anonymous, that's all you have to know. Because they do. He loved me, and I know he did. He still does. And I am. That's the story here, is love. And that's another hour. But that is the real story here. See, I came to Alcoholics Anonymous, and I continued to come because I was nurtured here. You see, I was loved here. My first Alcoholics Anonymous meeting, I felt that, and I liked that because I had never felt that before. And I kept coming because there was love here. And that's the healing power, the greatest power there is. And that is the definition of Alcoholics Anonymous, in my opinion. That's what happened to me. You loved me until I could love me, or until I could care for me. And I thank you for that. I stayed in Crownsville for 4.5 months. And I came home to a wife that didn't need me or want me. My son was 12 years old. He had never seen his father sober. My wife had gone back to work. She was making money enough she didn't need me. What had happened was she had to sign me out because I was in a mental institution, and in those days, if you didn't have somebody to sign you out for a permanent address, they wouldn't release you. And my family, my brothers or my sister or my mom wouldn't do that. They didn't know what to do with me, so they felt that I was better off where I was. So I eventually persuaded my then wife to sign me out, and she said it was all right, I could come and sleep in her apartment on a couch until I was financially able to move on. And those were the conditions under which I was released from the mental institution. And I came home, and she was working, and we finally got things going again. I was trying to save my marriage. I went to Alcoholics Anonymous meetings all the time, and I was trying to save my marriage like everybody else was trying to do, I thought anyway. And I finally got back in the big bed. And she became pregnant. She was able to stop work. I went into business almost immediately when I got out again for myself. I became self-employed, and she was able to stop work. But you know, the most important thing that I neglected to tell you was the night that I was released from Crownsville, June 6, 1967, I went to an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting. I called down Washington, D.C., and they told me where the meeting was, and it was in Maryland. That's where I was. And I started to walk, and I hitchhiked, and I got a ride there. And I walked in that building, the St. Barnabas Road Group in Oxon Hill, Maryland, and those people loved me more there than they did in Crownsville. And I could tell that. I could just feel it. And when I walked in there that night, I was 38 years old. This is what I brought to you. I didn't have a dime. Not a dime. I was entitled to a 60-month check, a $60 check, because I'd been institutionalized within the state of Maryland for longer than 90 consecutive days. And I got that check about 6 or 8 weeks later. I didn't have 5 cents, and I mean that literally. I was wearing state clothes, the ones that they told me didn't want to fit me, and I knew they didn't. And I was wearing a pair of shoes that they had given me, arrived there 4.5 months earlier, that looked like the ones that little Adam had been wearing and thrown away. I didn't have any place to go, and most important of all, I didn't have a friend. Not a one. And I was 38. And I had 9 teeth. 9 teeth. I love peanuts. And the tragedy of this story is that none of the teeth were over the other. I would try to eat them. I'd try to eat them. I'd just try to eat them. But they kept telling me, well, you keep coming back and things will get better. And they were right. They were totally right. And I went each and every night for at least 2 years. At least. Of course, I wasn't very much demand anywhere else. So I just kept coming to AA meetings. I got a home group right away. My first home group for the first 13 years that I was sober was the Congress Heights group. I was always active in that. I felt they couldn't run it without me. How could they? Then I got a sponsor after about 3 months. I've been home about 3 months. And heard this guy talk one night. His name's Ed Thompson. Ed died. He was 29 and a half years sober. Loved him more than any man I've ever met. He was just a terrific guy. He was talking in the downtown spot. I'd never seen him before. And he looked well. I liked the way he presented himself. When he walked, he knew where his foot was going to light, and I was stumbling over matchsticks. I just liked the way the guy looked. And he was talking. And I was impressed with him. And he kept talking about he was a member, he was employed by the CMP telephone company up there. And he got so bad, he was on a line crew. And he'd be down in the hole, and he's supposed to put the blue to the blue, and the green to the green, and the red. Well, he wasn't doing that. See, he had Washington, D.C. talking to San Diego, and so they told him, said, Ed, said, you're too good a man for us to let go. Said, we're going to let you get time to get your life together now. Said, what we're going to do, when I go fire you, what we're going to do, we're going to build a box. And we'll put it in the main office downtown. And he said, all you got to do is get up in the morning, come in, and sit up on the box, and don't touch nothing. And he says, we'll pay you. Now, that's the first time I'd ever seen this guy. The next statement was the reason that I knew that this guy was going to be my sponsor. He said he got so bad off with his drinking. He continued to drink, and he got so bad off that he would get up in the morning and call in and tell him he was too sick to come sit on the box. I didn't really need that word. I just did that because the pros do that. I see them do that. I've seen them do it. As soon as the meeting was over, I rushed right up to him and I asked him if he would be my sponsor. He said that he would. Started the most unique relationship I've ever had in my lifetime. I know that there are people that come to Alcoholics Anonymous, get sober and stay sober and die sober without a sponsor. But I believe you really cheat yourself. You really, really treat yourself. I wouldn't trade that for the world. If you were in this room tonight, I'm sure he is in spirit, but if you were here tonight physically, I would be aware of that. No matter where we went, he was always my sponsor, you see. He was always my sponsor. I didn't always like what he had to say. I didn't always agree what he had to say. I didn't always like him, but I always loved him. And whatever he said, I listened. And he was always my sponsor. Always. And I just kept coming to AA meetings. I kept coming. My wife and I stayed together for 4 years. And we did everything known to man or anybody else to save our marriage, and it just was too late. 4 years of this. And we had an AA baby. We did everything known, and it just didn't work. So we sat down one night, and we decided that in 10 days I would be gone, and in 10 days I left. And I started to support my children. My oldest son was not quite 18 yet. And through the courts, we went and we decided what I was to pay. And I supported both of my children until my oldest son was 18. And then my AA baby, I supported him until he just turned 18 a couple of years ago. In my AA baby, all I had to send was the money, but I bought every pair of pants he ever wore, all of his insurance, every toothbrush he ever used. And I did that because he was my son, and I could, and I wanted to do it. I wanted to do it. And today thank God for that. I thank God for that. Every month, the first of the month, for 15 years, he got a check. Every month. The day that I knew I was going to write the last check, he loves to eat. On his 18th birthday, I said, look, buddy, I said, what do you want to eat? I said, choose any place you want to choose because this is it. I said, this is him. And he came over, we had a nice meal, and I talked to them, both of them, my sons, every day. Every day. Sometimes a couple times. Their mother is doing well. She's sober in Alcoholics Anonymous about 2.5 years. My oldest son is sober in Alcoholics Anonymous 14 months. My AA baby is 20. Everybody loves him. You can't imagine what kind of a guy he is, but he's worthless. He is absolutely worthless. And I will buy a tape of this so you'll know that I said that. But he is just adorable. Everybody loves him. I kept coming to Alcoholics Anonymous, and I was self-employed. I moved away from home. I moved into an apartment in Camp Springs, Maryland. I lived alone for 8 years. I went to AA meetings. I traveled some. My business was progressing. I was doing well with that. My life was fine. Everything was going along fine. And it continued to do that because I was doing the things. I suspect that I averaged a meeting a day the first 10 years that I was sober. Because I was self-employed and I could leave the job and go to afternoon meetings and things of that nature. And I loved Alcoholics Anonymous, and I love Alcoholics Anonymous. It's certainly not a past tense statement. And I met my wife, Linda, at a meeting. She had been sober 2 years. And we started to go together. And we went together about a month. We went together about 3 years, actually, but we were going together about a month. And I started to ask her to marry me. And I begged her for the next 3 years. 3 years. You ought to see my knees. Just crawling around on anything. I just kept begging her. Just kept begging her. And she finally decided to marry me. And that was one of the best things that ever happened to me in my life. I just love my wife. I'm a little bit suspect of people that try to convince people of that, but she told me if I didn't say that, not to come back to the room. We have a real fine thing going for us. My life was never better. Really. My life was never. You're going to be the judge anyway. See, I think Alcoholics Anonymous is more or less a show and tell thing. I got up here now, I've told you basically who Ray Bennett is. Where I came from, my education or the lack of it, my training as a person or the lack of it, my relationship with God or the lack of it. And you're going to be the judge of that. So AA is a show and tell thing. And I'm a product of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I know that. And I feel good about that. I really feel good about that. See, when my son tells me he's gone to 4 meetings that week, I said to myself, I know he's going to be fine. If he'd have told me I made $4,000 last week, I would be suspect of that. But see, if he went to 4 AA meetings and made $4,000, he's going to be all right. Or $4 or nothing. And I know that. And I keep coming here because this is where I belong. This is where I belong. I heard a guy say the other night that the winners are doing what they need to do, and the losers are doing what they want to do. And I kind of like that. I like that. I keep coming here. I just keep coming. I have much more of everything than I need. More overcoats. Probably one of the most important assets, or the most important things in my life today is the thing that I think I cherish as much as anything else is that I approve of the way I live. Today I can tell you that I approve of the way I live. I could never, ever have said that with any honesty at all in my other life. And part of my AA life. And I just owe all that to the grace of God and the fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous, and nothing else. Nothing else. In my attendance of thousands of AA meetings that I love, that I dearly love. At this time, I would like to thank the committee for having me here, and my wife also, Linda. It's been a real privilege, real privilege. I will not soon forget my visit here to Winston-Salem. I will not soon forget that. But I have one story I want to leave you with. The story is that this guy, during the Depression, couldn't find a job. Well, first off, I suspect that alcoholics are one of the segments of the population that wonders what they would have become had this not happened. You know, had I not become an alcoholic, had this not happened, or, you know, I'm sure everybody, I thought that. And I'm sure all walks of society, I don't think we have a corner on anything, all walks of society, but I think in AA it's probably more prevalent. And the story is in the Depression days, this guy wanted to work, couldn't find a job. Just kept looking for a job, couldn't find a job, and he wound up in this house of prostitution. And he asked the madam, he found the madam, he asked her for a job, and she said, yeah, by chance, we can use somebody. He said, well, that's fine. He says, well, she said, we need a bookkeeper. He said, bookkeeper? He said, well, I couldn't keep you books. He said, I've never been to school a day in my life. He said, I can't read or write. And she said, well, I'm sorry. He said, we don't need anybody else. So because he was hungry and she had an apple there on her desk, so she gave him the apple. And he went out on the street, and the guy offered him a nickel for the apple, so he sold it. You know, and he sold that apple, and he bought some more apples. And he sold those. And pretty soon he had an apple stand. And then he had 2 apple stands. And then he had an apple truck. The apples, everything. Apple just went into business, and with apples he just made millions and millions of dollars through the years. And the time come, he wanted to get out of all of it. He wanted to stop work. He just wanted to just trunk the whole thing. And so he told the men, and so the men got the lawyers to draw the papers up, bring them over to him, and put them down in front of him. And the lawyer said, well, you'll have to sign this. And the old man looked at him and said, well, I can't sign. He said, I can't read or write. And the lawyer said, you mean to tell me you made all these millions of dollars and you can't read or write? And the man said, that's right. And the lawyer said, I wonder what you would have been if you could have read and wrote. And the old man said, I know what I'd have been. He said, I would have been a bookkeeper in a whorehouse. So if you're new to Alcoholics Anonymous, keep coming. I can tell you for sure that this is the finest thing that's ever happened to me in my life. Ever. I want to thank each of you for being here. Each of you. For sharing your experience and your strength and your hope with me. But most important of all, I want to thank the God of my understanding for my sobriety, and God bless you.